excuse me. Now you're starting your mornings with your skull sessions, but this evening we're hoping that you're joining us for what feels like a monumental moment for 11 Warriors. We're live on YouTube, we are live on Facebook, and we hope to break down the latest news coming out of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center and answer your questions in real time. There's no filters, there's no delays. It's just Ohio State content straight from a trusted source. Tonight, our content comes straight from Ryan Day, the Ohio State head coach. He addressed the media earlier today for the third time during preseason camp, and he addressed a lot, guys. He broke down Saturday's scrimmage in a little bit of detail. He gave us some updates on position battles at quarterback, on the offensive line, and on the defensive tackle position as well. So whether you're watching in Columbus or somewhere across Buckeye Nation, it's time to settle in and get ready for what we hope will be an entertaining show. So don't forget to drop your questions in the comments section. We'll hope to be engaging with them throughout the show and to keep you guys updated on everything Ohio State football. But guys, just to start off the show, what were your takeaways? Dan, let's start with you from Ryan Day's press conference today.
Yeah, I think I'd have to start with the offensive line. I had asked him a couple questions about the offensive line today. And, I think coming out of his most recent press conference a week ago, I think my biggest takeaway was that he had said Austin Siereveld could be Ohio State's starting left tackle this season. And then he doubled down on that on Monday, saying that Austin Siereveld has been working, quote unquote, exclusively at left tackle. And so it certainly sounds like Austin Siereveld, a guy that he's been talking up since the spring, is well on his way to being Ohio State's starting left tackle. And the other interesting part of that is it seems like Phillip Daniels is making a surge toward potentially being that starting right tackle. We heard a couple of guys last week, Caleb Downs when he was on BTN, James Peoples during his interview session, bring up Phillip Daniels as somebody who had been impressing on the offensive line. And then, today Ryan Day mentioned he's been taking a lot of reps at right tackle. Onianwa still taking reps at both positions, kind of swinging back and forth, but it feels like Phillip Daniels may be emerging as that front runner to be the starting right tackle, with Onianwa being a guy who's, maybe falling a little bit behind in that competition to be a starter, which is surprising because he was a guy when he came in, the expectation was he's going to be Ohio State starting left tackle. And now it feels like maybe that's going another way.
Yeah, it seems like Onianwa was somebody, Dan. I read an article from The Athletic earlier this week that they ranked him as the number 10 overall transfer coming into Ohio State this year across college football. He's a guy that was highly touted coming in. It was Tom Luganbill from ESPN who said that he thought Onianwa could be one of the top tackles drafted not only last year, but then coming into this year that he could play up to his potential and be one of the top tackles selected. So to hear Ryan Day be a little bit non-committal to whether or not Onianwa would be somebody that could start for them at left tackle, maybe not now even at right tackle, where Day said today that Phillip Daniels has really been making a push at the position. I know that's been something that has come as a shock to me. Andy, have you felt similarly that has been a surprising part or surprising development of preseason camp?
Yeah, I'd say a surprising development because obviously we had hints of this last week when Ryan had said that Austin was working at left tackle. I think there were certain people that thought maybe I read a little too much into those comments. But it's clear now that Austin is, like I think today pointed out, that Austin is the left tackle for this team going into the season. I mean, if he's working exclusively there, and Day has said since the spring he's going to be a starter on the offensive line, two and two together, Austin Siereveld is going to be your starting left tackle. And so, does it say more about where Austin Siereveld has come, how far he's gone, the improvements he's made since last year, getting the opportunities he got, working in with the rotations and getting some starting experience here and there, but now solidifying himself as a bona fide starter for this offensive line, being an Iron Buckeye? Or is it an indictment on Onianwa not being where the staff thought he was coming in from Rice? And I tend to lean a little more toward it's a compliment to Austin Siereveld than the other, although I think there are clear concerns when it comes to Onianwa and pass protection. That's why there was a huge focus for him in the offseason of shedding some weight so he could keep up with those speed rushers on the outside. So important, especially when you're staring down a Colin Simmons from Texas and the edge rushers that Texas is going to present in week one. So important to have ready to go those tackles in pass protection. And if Ethan Onianwa isn't living up to that standard necessarily in practice, the fact that he's swinging now between guard and tackle, it sounds like it does make you wonder where he's at in that area of his game, and it being the biggest question mark going from Rice to Ohio State, the level of competition so much greater is going to maybe expose some flaws in the game. Still a ways to go in camp. Nothing is finalized yet, I think, on the offensive line with this, but it does seem like a competition at right tackle is now evolving between Philip Daniels and Ethan Onianwa, where we thought it was at right tackle maybe between Austin Siereveld and Philip Daniels.
Andy, were there any other takeaways that you had from Ryan Day's press conference today?
Yeah, I think people are going to be interested in the quarterbacks. There were some interesting updates there. Day said they got more information last week, and the indication, maybe the subtext of that, felt like there's maybe some separation that's starting to occur. Day wasn't going to put a name to that. And from his perspective, I understand why you wouldn't publicly if you're not going to name the starter full out. Why say the X guy is ahead of the other guy right now? It just creates some controversy when you're trying to create an open competition and really feel like both guys are battling. It seems like they're happy with the development of both of them, but yeah, I don't think this is an answer we're going to get necessarily in the next few days, but soon. And Ryan Day didn't want to put a timetable on exactly when he's going to name a starter, but did say previously this month, that they want to have it done by 2 weeks before Texas. 2 weeks before Texas is this Saturday. So I think I would direct the attention toward Ryan Day's next Monday press conference. There is one scheduled from our media side here. Next Monday's press conference as a potential date to watch out for when Ohio State could name its starting quarterback. Um, Very interested to see how it plays out. They have another huge scrimmage on Saturday after they had their first scrimmage of the preseason camp this past Saturday. Those are always very telling for where everyone is in all these position battles. But I think as quarterback stands, I think they're moving toward a decision at the position.
Dan, Andy and I weren't covering the team at this point, but I did find it interesting that Ryan Day likened this quarterback battle to the battle between Dwayne Haskins and Joe Burrow in 2018. He said, there's no situation that's exactly alike, but there are similarities. He declined to go into what exactly those similarities were. But do you see any similarities between this quarterback battle that we're watching now and the one that occurred between Dwayne Haskins and Joe Burrow a few years ago, other than the fact that these are just two great quarterbacks and they're both battling it out and trying their best to win the job?
Well, I can kind of see the comparisons. Like you can kind of see the Lincoln Kienholz, Joe Burrow comparison, just in terms of some of their makeup, some of the style of how they play, being that, multi-sport athlete out of high school, maybe not the highest recruited guy out of high school. I think you could see maybe some of those comps there. We heard Ryan Day say last week that, compare Julian Sayin's release to Dwayne Haskins. So, I think the difference would be that it felt like going into that, what year is that, 2018, that Dwayne won the starting job, that because of that Michigan game the year before when he came in and led Ohio State to a comeback victory, it really felt like, because of that, it was going to be very tough for Joe Burrow to win the job away from Dwayne because he had that experience. Obviously, Julian has been viewed as the favorite in this competition all along, but he doesn't have anything close to the kind of experience that Dwayne got in that Michigan game the year before. So to me, that makes this a little different in the sense that neither one of these guys has really played outside of that Cotton Bowl 2 years ago, which I think is tough to evaluate for Lincoln because he really didn't get any first team reps. And then he got thrown in there behind a porous offensive line after Devin Brown got hurt in the first quarter.
I think for me, obviously Joe Burrow too, the hand injury, I think also that kept him sidelined during key parts of that battle. may have played a role. And another key difference here, I think, is that this is a battle that's actually going into fall camp. We saw Joe Burrow transfer out. The spring after it was clear that Dwayne was going to be the guy going forward for Ohio State, and then obviously had the run he did first as LSU starter in 2018. Things click at the end of that season, going into 2019. I think where I see a similarity too, Dan, is even just in the years of both guys. Dwayne coming off was a actually I take that back. That was Dwayne was a redshirt sophomore for a second. I thought he was a second year. So moving past that, Dwayne was the natural, to your point, the natural arm talent guy in that competition. When you watch Dwayne Haskins throw, the zip on the ball was so apparent, the way he could laser the ball down the field. And just, I remember watching those deep balls, and 2018 was my first year covering the team. Seeing Dwayne Haskins throw a deep ball, and just like most guys, when they throw it and it has that high arc trajectory, it seemed like he could just throw a rope 50 yards down the field on a line. And that obvious arm talent is where you say, comparing again, like you said, the multi-sport athlete element of Joe Burrow and Lincoln Kienholz, it also is to me like that naturally gifted passer. When you watch Julian, you can see the quick release, you can see the natural arm talents there, but he's got to figure out the other parts of quarterbacking, the mental parts of it, diagnosing defenses, those kinds of things. And that's where Joe Burrow excelled when things clicked. Joe Burrow is one of the most gifted quarterbacks ever. And I say that as an unbiased Bengals fan. One of the greatest quarterbacks ever when it comes to most gifted ever. Still got to prove it out over multiple years, I think. But one of the most gifted ever at diagnosing defenses, knowing where to go with the ball, making the right read, making the right decision. Um, that was one of his gifts, and just being a fiery competitor who's wants nothing more than to win, and sneaky athletic too. Joe is, of course, like we said, multi-sport athlete. But when you watch Dwayne, the natural gifts in his arm were so apparent, and I think it's the same with Julian Sayin. We'll see if those two achieve the same heights that Dwayne Haskins and Joe Burrow did, certainly in college. But I do see parallels and differences, like Dan pointed out already.
Yeah, to give everybody a peek behind the curtain a little bit when we get to watch practice, typically Dan and I are running around the fields trying to get as much practice footage as we can. And it's a little bit difficult to communicate where exactly we are and what we're taking videos of. And Dan and I actually took videos, both of us, of the quarterbacks. And I'm glad that we did, because we both were able to arrive at the conclusion, Dan, you can attest to this, that when Julian Sand was throwing the football, just in a one small sample size drill, of course, but you just watch the spin, you watch the placement, you watch his accuracy, and you're able to say, he's different. Jeremiah Smith said that he's different, the way that he throws the football. And whenever we talk about Lincoln Kienholz, whenever Ryan Day talks about Lincoln Kienholz, he does, to your point, Andy, bring up his three-sport background and the fact that in high school from South Dakota, he was spending a majority of his time playing other sports in basketball and baseball. I heard him have a comment the other day to one of the reporters as we were talking to him for the press conference that, he had offers to go play Division I basketball. He probably had offers to go play Division I baseball. This is a guy that is one of the most talented athletes on the team. And so now that he's fully dedicating himself to the quarterback position, it gives Ohio State something to think about. I think that he is somebody that potentially gives Ohio State an option like they had a couple of years ago with Devin Brown in particular, those red zone packages where you have a dual threat guy that can maybe put his head down and gain a couple yards. I know Ryan Day is always looking for ways to improve in the red area. But yeah, I think the competition, I trust that Ryan Day is still contemplating the decision about who he wants to start at quarterback. And I think throughout the course of this week, it's going to become a little bit easier to make the decision as they continue to ramp up the intensity toward Texas. But Dan, I want to offer the platform to you. Any thoughts on the quarterback competition as where it stands right now?
Yeah, I think it's still close, like you said. I think, if one person had, really pulled in front of the other, there'd be more indications of it than there have been right now. So, like Andy said before, I think a week from today, there's a good chance we will be talking about a starting quarterback being named for Ohio State, because I think that's the target date, not just at quarterback, but at all other positions. When he was talking about the offensive tackles, he was kind of saying the same thing. Like, this week is going to be a big week in terms of that competition between Phillip Daniels Ethan Onianwa. So I think really, they'll have another scrimmage on Saturday to close out the week. I think really when they come off the field on Saturday, the coaches are probably going to get together this weekend and say, all right, who are our best guys? Let's start setting our depth chart. Because when you get to a week from today, they play Texas in less than 3 weeks, boys. You get into next week, you really want the next 2 weeks. The first couple weeks of camps are kind of more focused on yourself, on fundamentals, position battles, setting the depth chart. The next 2 weeks have to be fully focused on how do we go beat Texas? Because, oh yeah, in other news today, Texas was named as the #1 team in the country in the AP poll. And so Ohio State has to be ready to play its best football in less than 3 weeks from today. And so after this week, you kind of have to get out of the position battle phase and you got to really focus on, okay, this is our first team offense. This is our first team defense. Game plan. How do we beat Texas?
Dan, I want to try something. Doing this live. I'm going to try something here. Never done this before, but we're going to try and talk about the AP poll. See if I can share my screen here with our audience for a little presentation mode. But what I want to do is offer everyone a glimpse at what the top 25 looks like. My computer might stunt me on this, but let's talk about the AP poll. Dan, if you wouldn't mind going through just the first couple of teams that are available with Texas debuting at #1. We have Penn State coming in at #2. And then we have Ohio State coming in at #3. #4, Dan, you've talked about them before for keeping people on the radar, is that Clemson's there. What are your thoughts on the way that the AP poll shaped up as I try and get my computer to work with me here?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to go off of that, as you probably can all tell, we're still working out the kinks here. It's we're just kind of getting into the live streaming game, so this will get a little smoother. I'm sure some of you clicked on this, seeing that it was another Ryan Day press conference. We're still kind of working some things out. Hopefully, that's been fixed on your end. But if you clicked on it thinking it was Ryan Day's second press conference of the day, we apologize. We're still kind of working through some of the kinks here, but. Getting back to your question about the AP poll, I've said it before. I know Andy and I have talked about it before on some of our shows. Hey, you got to work in there, Chase.
Here we go.
That. We got a look at the AP top 25, so that'll help us all to discuss this properly. But I've mentioned it before. I'm very high on Penn State. I know there's plenty of people out there who are listening. We're probably going, it's all hype. They can't beat Ohio State. Big game, James. James Franklin's gonna choke when it matters most. And look, that may be true. I think this year is going to be the ultimate test of whether James Franklin can get his team over the hump, because I just keep going back to it, and maybe it's a little cliche, but I do think there's really something to it. Michigan 2 years ago brought back a ton of seniors who were going to be NFL draft picks. They go on to win the national championship. Ohio State last year brings back a ton of seniors who are going to be NFL draft picks, wins the national championship. Penn State brings back a ton of seniors this year who are going to be NFL draft picks. Do they go on to win the national championship? I certainly think it's possible. So for me, if I was doing a ballot, if I was doing this in a predictive sense, like I can see the argument of like Ohio State should be #1 because they won the national championship last year. If I was doing this in a predictive sense, I would have had Penn State at #1 on my ballot. I would have had Clemson #2 on my ballot. I think Clemson, I think this is going to be the year that we see Clemson kind of reemerge as a power team in college football. I think they've been down for a few years. We're late getting into the NIL game, very late getting into the transfer game. But I think they took more steps this year to kind of get more aggressive in those areas, realizing that they need to be more competitive on those fronts in order to be a national championship contender. And you look at that team, one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Cade Klubnik, two of the best defensive linemen in TJ Parker and Peter Woods. I think there's just a lot of talent on both sides of the ball for that team. And I still think, even if he's, somewhat antiquated in some of his thinking and was a little bit late to get into the game on some of his stuff, I still think Dabo Swinney's one of the best coaches in the country. So I think, I do think it's the correct top 4. I think you could quibble on the order of the top 4. You could rank them in any order. I do think it's the correct top 4. I think, Texas, Ohio State, probably pound for pound, the 2 most talented rosters in the country. I think Penn State and Clemson, with all the experience they have, are two teams that are very well built to contend for a national title this year. So I do think they're the four best teams in the country. I really think you could justify any order, but not surprised to see those four at the top.
Andy, when you saw this AP poll, and if you want to even enter into the conversation, the coaches poll, which looked very similar, really the only tweak that was happening of note for Ohio State fans is that Ohio State appeared at number 2 instead of number 3, and setting that matchup up as a 1 versus 2 matchup, being Texas and Ohio State, and this AP poll has it as a 1 versus 3. But Andy, as you look at the AP poll, do you have any thoughts about where the positions of each team lands, and then any thoughts on where Ohio State lands in its initial ranking for the preseason?
Yeah, I agree with Dan I agree with the top 4, and the order is debatable. I think it's interesting the split between Texas and Ohio State are both these teams with extremely talented rosters, but a lot of new pieces and a lot of positions. Arch Manning, everyone expects him to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but still going to be, he's still going to be taking the reins for the first time this year. Obviously, he's had some experience in the past, but he's going to be taking over that job for the first time, full time this year in his first game as the starting quarterback at Texas that's going to be in the shoe. Texas replaced basically an entire NFL starting lineup in their secondary. When you talk about Jade Barrett and Andrew Bakuba, some of the pieces that are going to be gone from last year, that secondary that slowed down Jeremiah Smith, replacing so much, replaced a ton on the defensive line through the transfer portal. Texas and Ohio State are both, I think, the ceiling of their rosters is probably the highest in college football. Very talented, but that Penn State, Clemson, like Dan said, the experience they have coming back. Penn State has a lot of pieces to really like. One of the best backfields, if not the best backfield in the country, with Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. A lot of experience returning on the offensive line to pave the way for those guys. Drew Aller. I've been on record multiple times now this offseason as a former Drew Aller detractor as saying I think he's going to have a big year. I'll say it again here. I think those are, to me, the top 4 teams in the country, and then Clemson with the experience they've got coming back, the talent, Kate Klubnik, all those pieces. I think those are, to me, the 4 best teams in the country if you were to ask me before either of these polls came out. And for Texas to be ranked ahead of Ohio State, to me, I thought was a little, like, I go back and forth on, because both of them are replacing a lot, and Ohio State won the latest matchup. But whoever wins that game to start the year is going to be the number 1 team in the country. So it kind of doesn't matter. I think it's just going to settle who is number 1 at the start of the year on August 30th. And really, my only disappointment in seeing Ohio State ranked 3rd amongst these teams is that it pokes a small hole in the number 1 versus number 2 hype of that game on August 30th. And not as much, because I think you can still look at the coaches poll and say it's a number 1, number 2 game, and it's still a top 3 game by the AP. But that, to me, was the only dampener of seeing Ohio State ranked number 3rd. I don't disagree with it on principle. I think all 4 of those teams could be ranked in any order.
It's also still the first top 3 matchup, I believe, in a season opener in Ohio State history. So it's still the biggest season opener in college football history, as Fox was billing it as. I think that's still accurate. Can you be the biggest season opener in college football history when you play at noon? Maybe that's debatable, but in terms of the rankings, I think it's certainly there. And the other thing off of that too is, like, when you talk about these polls, we can debate them all we want. I mean, it don't really matter, because whoever wins that game is going to be number 1 after week 1. Like, there's no doubt that whoever wins Texas, with where both teams are in a poll, it doesn't matter. I mean, Clemson plays LSU, that'll be another big game, but, like, it doesn't really matter what these other teams do in week 1. Whoever wins Ohio State, Texas will without a doubt be the number 1 team in both polls after week 1.
And what's interesting, Dan, is that was a bit of news today coming out of the AP poll dropping, is that Ohio State's still favored as a 3-point favorite going into this season opener. I wrote a small item over at 11warriors.com which had stated, given ESPN's research dating back to 1978, that this is the first time, potentially, if the line holds, that the number one ranked team in the AP poll could be an underdog in week one. This was ESPN's Doug Greenberg that reported it on Monday, that the previous tightest week one spread was when number one Florida State lost to number eight, the number 8 team as a 4-point favorite in 1988. And then Auburn also lost to the number 10 team as a 5-point favorite in 1988. So while the Notre Dame team that won and covered a 5-point spread against Michigan in 1990 is kind of the one example of the number one team delivering upon its billing, what we could potentially see is that the books kind of like Ohio State in this matchup, going back to what Andy had said earlier, that there can be questions about where you place Texas, where you place Ohio State, considering their roster turnover from a year ago, considering that Ohio State won the most recent matchup in the Cotton Bowl, considering that Ohio State is the defending national champion, or attacking national champion, if you want to use the words that Ryan Day used at Big Ten Media Days. So there definitely is a lot riding into this matchup. It seems that the books favor Ohio State going in, but obviously it's the first game and there's so many question marks going into it. Dan, I think we could maybe go on to a little bit of a tangent, as you mentioned, about the noon kickoff of this event. But Ryan Day also talked today about wanting that game. If I can bring it back to his press conference, he was talking about this game being one of the biggest games that Ohio State will play all year, and one of the biggest games that he has coached during his tenure. Somebody had asked him whether or not he's gotten better sleep since the national championship, and I loved his reaction. He basically just, with a blank stare, just said no, and then he laughed. He opened up a little bit, but he said, if we didn't open up against Texas, maybe he would be sleeping better, but you just can't take a deep breath. This game is a monster, is what he called it right out of the gate, and they're very excited to play in this game. He said he wants Buckeye Nation to be fired up like he knows they are. He thinks it's going to be an unbelievable atmosphere, that he wants the shoe to be rocking. He mentioned Indiana last year, which that was, I can confidently say, during my tenure covering the team, one of the most electric atmospheres that Ohio State had going in, because of all the different words that Curt Cignetti had for Ohio State entering the matchup. And Will Howard was certainly fired up to be playing in the game. But Ryan Day does not want Texas to be able to get away with their clap cadence. He wants them to have to move to a silent count, and he wants the shoe to be as loud as it's ever been. The atmosphere, whether it kicks off at noon or whether it kicks off at 8:30, it can have an impact on that. But regardless, Ryan Day wants to see the shoe be as electric and as loud as it's been. What do you guys think about Ryan Day kind of making this statement a few weeks before the game kicks off? I'm sure it will ramp up as game week enters or continues to get closer. But what do you guys make of Ryan Day's statement today, and just kind of getting the crowd ready for what should be an entertaining season opener?
And it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's any game to hype up, it's this one. Coaches love to talk sometimes about how, it's about us, and every game is the same each week. But everybody knows, like, you open the season of Texas, it's a heck of a lot different than open the season against Akron. And so that really, puts the impetus on it to start hyping this game up a few weeks in advance. And you could tell Ryan Day wants his players to know that too. Like you could tell he's talked to his players a lot this preseason about, we start with Texas. Like, we got to be ready to go. Like, there's no time going into the season to kind of, figure out who we are. You got to have it figured out going into week one, or you're not going to win that game. And so, we do know now that, unlike in past years, one loss is not the be all end all of your season, but nevertheless, this is a game they want to go win. I mean, you think about even just the big picture of a college ball playoff. If you start your season with a win over Texas, that's such a huge thing you're going to have on your resume all year long. That if you end up, dropping a game here or there down the stretch, that win in week one could be such a huge resume booster for you, especially if Texas is as good as people think they are going to be. So, I think the sense of urgency is there. He wants the fans to have that sense of urgency. The fans should have that sense of urgency. I mean, we can all acknowledge it's a noon game is not the same as a 7:30 game. There's a different energy with a night game, but I still expect the stadium to be loud. We've seen plenty of noon games, like you mentioned, that Indiana game last year. I mean, certainly Michigan games of years past. There's been plenty of noon games that have had great environments in the shoe. What I really want to know from Andy is, does he think the fans are going to go wild for the new game day anthem of Ohio by Caamp with 2 A's?
No, that was my assessment on 11 Warriors earlier today. Based off a lot of the comments on that article, it seems that fans agree with that. For me, I think if the goal is any sort of hype up, rallying cry, get the crowd pumped, get everyone energetic, then it's just definitely not the song for that. Um, bluegrass isn't my genre normally. I'm a rap guy. Not all of our audience is going to like that. That's fine. But I'm a rap guy first and foremost. Like some classic rock too. But um, as I like the song, honestly, like just in chamber, isolated by itself. But for that purpose of something to get the stadium going, it doesn't have the energy of that. And it's not like, I think one of the key things to really getting something like that to catch on, particularly with students or fans in general, it's going to be having a really catchy chorus that everyone can sing along to, and it that again, that bluegrass kind of different meter, it lacks that element. It being a song just like you're going to play an emotional tribute video to the state of Ohio and try to unite Ohioans around it, I think it maybe could work in that context. That seemed to be the context Ross Bjork was hinting at in his comments when they unveiled this, and sort of what the Tradition Evolved page 2 on the website was hinting at, of this is going to be like again, they play a nice tribute video to Ohio. It's an emotional moment for the stadium. It's just, I don't know, like very few people. I think it was definitely not a majority. I would even put it like, I don't know, like 10% of Ohio State's fan base being very, very, I think, um, generous. Knew this song before this past week. Knew of this song, and so it's not something that had an inherent emotional connection with the state like Rocky Top does with Tennessee, or Country Roads does with West Virginia, or Dixieland Delight does in the South, or Sweet Home Alabama, also an Alabama tradition there, but has with that state. This isn't a song that Ohioans knew ahead of time and already had this emotional connection with. And for me, it's not necessarily about the state of Ohio either. It's about childhood memories formed while in Ohio. The band is from Columbus. Um, but not Ohio specific. Like the closest thing is they talk about like autumn never ends in football, and a lot of football is very popular in Ohio. It's very popular everywhere. It's the biggest sport in the United States. Honestly, growing up in Ohio, and I'm a little younger than the band members, autumn never ends is not something I can identify with. It seems to go straight from summer to winter here anymore.
It does.
But I get that. That is like a traditional sort of Midwestern thing. But other than that, there's nothing identifiable about it being a song about Ohio other than them singing the word Ohio to me. And it's hard to find a song like that, I'll grant you. Those don't grow on trees, people singing beautifully about, the Buckeye State. But um, I just think Dan raised this point earlier in our conversations before, is I think maybe there's a little too much of a lean on them trying to go full out everything Ohio, 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 when if you're actually trying to generate a raucous game day atmosphere, there were a lot of other songs on the table that would have been better choices. And if you wanted to stay in the Ohio vein, then pick a 21 Pilots song. In the article I wrote today, I pointed out "Ride" as a chorus I could see everyone singing in the stadium. Taking my time on my ride. Like I could sing a whole stadium singing. I could see a whole singing stadium singing "Gold on the Ceiling" or any number of Black Keys songs, another band from Ohio. And they played the Black Keys song "Ohio" as a walkout song sometimes after the game at Ohio Stadium. I'm not, if they wanted the emotional tribute video thing, it wouldn't be as good of a song for that. But I think there were much better choices on the table for them. The song in and of itself, I kind of like. I think it's fine. Bluegrass isn't my normal thing, but if you're trying to hype a crowd up, it's not going to work much for that. Maybe it could be some sort of emotional thing that fans have like a nice moment with it during the game. I think that's the other thing is like everyone's mad about it now. Very clearly, the reaction to this has not been positive, but it could still work out on game days. And it's just like something, it's just like a nice moment. Sloopy isn't going anywhere. It's not replacing anything else. It's just, for what they wanted to do with it, I feel like there were better options.
I also feel like a lot of times these things happen organically too. Like,
yeah,
people will catch on to a certain song. Like, I don't know necessarily all the history of like certain songs, but like, I just remember, my understanding is a lot of these changes were inspired by being at Oregon last year. And the loudest I remember the stadium being was when the famous line played from Not Like Us, a song that I know Andy's a big fan of by Kendrick Lamar. So, these things can be organic, but to your point, like, it's also the whole thing of like, does the song need to be about Ohio? I mean, House of Pain isn't from Wisconsin, but Jump Around is now synonymous with Wisconsin football. So I really don't see this catching on. I mean, maybe we'll be proven wrong. I really don't see this catching on, but maybe you play more music during games, which it sounds like is going to be a case. Maybe something else catches on as something that the fans really want to sing along to.
Yeah, as a Caamp fan, the discourse around the song has been a little bit disheartening to me. I can go down to my living room and bring back up with me on this live stream 4 or 5 vinyls that I have of Caamp albums. But even I, as a fan, I will acknowledge it's not the way that it's marketed right now as kind of being a song that the stadium can sing along to, and that there can be a camaraderie around it, and that it can generate hype. Just isn't one that I've ever particularly associated with Caamp. I can say, having also gone to a few concerts, I don't think that that's typically the vibe that you get while going to one of those. I've been to a concert at Newport. I've been to a concert at, I believe it's called Caamp Alive now, the one downtown next to the Clippers Stadium. It's changed names about 6 times at this point since I've been going to concerts there. And then there was one at Nationwide. And I wouldn't say that there was any point during the concert that I felt like I was going to get out of my seat and jump up and down because I was so excited. It's very much a mellow, laid back kind of vibe that I have never really envisioned it being the song that people inside Ohio Stadium would sing. What's interesting is that this song has always been one I thought that the state of Ohio would use for their marketing commercials when they campaign for people to travel here, for people to engage in tourism here. But for some reason, the state of Ohio uses the song by Caamp, See the World, which just doesn't make any sense. Like, if you're going to use a song about coming to Ohio, use the song that's titled Ohio, not the song Seeing the World. And then when we're talking about Ohio State using this song, don't use this one. Use, like Andy said, the Black Keys, Ohio, or go somewhere in a different direction. I know I mentioned the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland. If you want to go with the rock and roll song, just say we're honoring that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is within the Buckeye State, and we've picked this rock song that maybe it doesn't have a connection to the Ohio State University, but maybe it has a connection to the state of Ohio. But yes, all good conversation about the in-game atmosphere. As we talk about more of the tradition evolved kind of additions that Ohio State is making, just kind of one final note on that. I appreciate, for as much as the changes have been Ohio-centric, I do appreciate that Ohio State has continued to make Archie Griffin a focal point of its honoring of the people that came before and carving the path into the future. I've really enjoyed that. They gave Archie Griffin the moment in the spring game a few years ago where he ran untouched for the touchdown. I've enjoyed that they've made it a point to honor him being with the dotting of the I, because that's been such a rare accomplishment or a rare feat for not only Ohio State University graduates, but Ohioans. And so now to see him be a victory bell ringer has been pretty cool. Now that he'll be able to kind of set the tone for the Texas game. I know that there have been questions, though, and maybe we'll have to write an article based on how much attention Andy's has gotten about the song, about whether or not using the victory bell before actually securing victory is a good thing for Ohio State I don't know if you guys have talked about that before, but do you guys have any thoughts about Ohio State using that bell as a kind of a marker sign for setting the tone for the game as the guys walk out of the tunnel, and maybe even using it on third downs too?
Andy, you look like you have thoughts.
To quote a certain Stevie Wonder song, I think people out there are very superstitious, and it's maybe not something that's gonna calling it the victory bell and ringing it before you win is tempting fate in a certain way. You know, I'm not superstitious. I'm not even a little stitious, frankly.
That's right. That's right.
The famous quote. What is that from even? Do you know, Chase?
The Office.
Yeah, that's right. It's The
Yeah.
Office. It's The Office. But I'm not even a little stitious. I like even when I played baseball. For baseball was the only time. Baseball was the only exception. When I played baseball as a kid, I had the same warm up routine every time before I went to the plate. When I went to the plate, I always hit my bat on the front of the plate, back of the plate, front of the plate, and then raised it to my shoulder. Right. Baseball was the only time I made room for superstition in my life. So personally, don't have an issue with it per se. My dad, I know, would though. My dad is all about like don't tempt fate that way. Don't call it the victory. I know it's something he wouldn't like, and I know it's something for a lot of fans. It's like, just call it ringing the bell. Don't call it the victory bell if you're going to ring it before it's victory. Um, I do think it can actually add to the game day atmosphere. I mean, they've played Hell's Bells on third downs in stadiums across the land forever. Ohio State did for a long time. Um, and that, like, just that chime can really get you going, like that loud percussive sound. It's the signal for the crowd. Like, if you're going to use it on a big third down, you're going to use it in a time where you need the crowd to be loud and engaged. I could see it working. I could see it working for that purpose, especially if you then couple it with, hey, maybe like Archie Griffin's ringing the bell, or you have someone else. Like, I love what at Penn State what they did when they had like a famous alumni on the field, or they had some famous member. They would stick a microphone in their face and just have them start pumping up the crowd. If you had an
Oregon
Andy
did that too.
Katzenmoyer, yeah.
Yep.
If you had an Andy Katzenmoyer down on the field and you're ringing the victory bell and he's saying, "Let's get high, Buckeye," like the Andy Katzenmoyer, just the first name that pops into my head there. But yeah, anyone from any recognizable Buckeye legend like that, you have them pumping up the crowd. You have the victory bell sounding in the background. I know it's something that the superstitious fans out there, and I hear you and I get you. I understand the superstition, but I think it's something that could work if implemented the right way.
Yeah, and I think, a couple of big things from this tradition's evolved that I think are important and big. Number one is unifying the student section. Like, to me, I think that's the biggest of these
Yes.
changes that, like, to me, should have been made a long time ago. You go to Oregon,
Yes.
you go to Penn State, you go to a lot of those stadiums to get loud. All the students are together, and together they make more noise. And so I think putting all the students in one end of a stadium, I think that's a very positive change that I think will help make the shoe louder. Number two goes back to what you're talking about in terms of, recognizing those former players and stuff like that during the game. You got to make it a little bit more of a hype moment. We've seen a lot of times where, they parade former players or current teams from other sports out on the field, but they don't really do anything to engage the crowd with it. They just kind of put them on the screen, they wave to the crowd, they play some music in the background, and that's that. Like, you need to like make that a little bit more of a thing that like gets people excited. And then beyond that, a big thing is like, you can't do a sponsor engagement every single media timeout. Like, and I think Ross Bjork has realized that there's still going to be a little bit of that because I got to make money, but I think you realize like you got to do a little bit more in between game action to keep the crowd engaged. It can't just always be something that's tied to some sponsor. There's got to be more authentic stuff in there as part of the game day script, as they might call it, that gives people more reason to keep the energy up in between. We know Fox, it's going to be like 3.5 minutes every time they go to a media timeout, especially for that Ohio State Texas game, because they're going to sell a lot of commercials. They're going to really stretch out those breaks. When you have those long commercial breaks, it's easy to suck the energy out of a stadium. So you need to do more during those breaks to kind of keep people excited, keep people amped up. They're making a concerted effort to do that. We'll see if it works.
And while we're talking about music too, I think the easiest way to do that is with music playing. Like that was, I think, one of the main things that kept the atmosphere going during the Tennessee game, the playoff game in the shoe this past winter, was playing Mo Bamba in between during the commercial break. Just something that the students can recognize, engage with, get excited, and then you come back and it's football again. Like, and why can't a sponsor a commercial break song? Like, why can't a sponsor say this is the whatever commercial break tunes brought to you by Safe Light Auto Glass or whatever? Like that, I think there is even opportunities to marry those two together and have something that's sponsored that makes you money and at the same time is keeping the crowd engaged and entertained and having fun. But yeah, I think to me the easiest solution to keep fans engaged through the timeouts is just good music that the kids connect with, and maybe the adults too.
Well, great thoughts, guys. I know that we have a few more opportunities this week to be down on campus to provide insight to our readers. We had Ryan Day today in the team room. We're going to have the offensive line and its coach, Tyler Bowen, on Tuesday tomorrow. And then we're going to have on Thursday, Larry Johnson and his defensive linemen. Is there anything in our closing thoughts that you guys are looking forward to the rest of the week and learning? I know the Austin Siereveld stuff's going to be big, Philip Daniels and that whole development, but anything else that you guys are looking forward to as the week continues and as we get closer to the Texas game?
I mean, I certainly think defensive tackle depth is going to be a big point of conversation with Larry Johnson and the Ohio State defensive line on Thursday. I think you'll probably hear some of those guys that are probably pretty hungry to prove a point about, we can reload with the guys that were gone last year. So, certainly be interesting to talk to those guys. Like you said, I mean, offensive line, there's still a lot of competition going on there. So we'll see if we get any insight from Tyler Bowen. And, I think just, lots of good content coming on 11warriors.com. We just started our 11 Warriors season preview today. That's going to be rolling out over the next 2 weeks. So you definitely want to keep up with that. Lots of good content coming there. Some creative story ideas. I know later this week at some point, Andy and I are going to do our team draft. So here on the YouTube channel, you'll see a video from us in a couple days of us. I know that I'm sure Andy is already strategizing about his draft ideas. I know I've done a little bit of that as well. So that'll be fun, kind of going head to head and picking our teams. And we'll have some fun with that, some more fun stuff coming up on 11warriors.com as well. So, as I said, we're less than 3 weeks away now from the season opener. So plenty to talk about, plenty to write about. Looking forward to it.
What's the record there, by the way? You guys had 2 years of experience. Is it 1-1 or is somebody up 2-0?
I think it's 1-1.
I think Dan's up to.
All right.
I
don't remember.
Okay.
I know Griffin spanked me one year. I think last year I got the dub.
All right.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Dan's 2-0 between us here. So I'll have to be.
Look at me being humble, thinking
game.
I was 1-1.
2-0, whether it's 2-0 or it's 1-1, this is Andy's year to make his mark and to establish himself as a force in the preseason drafts. Everyone that joined, thank you so much. As we mentioned, this is our first episode of 11 Warriors Live. We hope to have more episodes in the future as this preseason continues. And then once the season starts, we hope to have some time to break down the game, to provide some insight and some coverage for Ohio State, Texas, and as it moves forward into the non-conference schedule against Grambling and Ohio, and then into the Big Ten schedule. So there's lots more to come here on 11 Warriors Live. As Dan mentioned, there's lots more coming on 11warriors.com. So stay tuned there, and we thank you guys for joining us.